Okay, so we have today Sebastian Collette, who's being interviewed by Allie Marshall. I've known Sebastian for some time. I've been impressed by his um, photography and also how he writes about and talks about his photography for some time. Sebastian Colette, and I'm doing a little bit of a French thing there. Sebastian Colette grew up in Ohio and France. Following an early career as a pianist, he fell in love with photography at Bard College. My screen is disappearing. He fell in love with photography at Bard College while studying with Stephen Shore and Larry Fink. Upon graduating, he traveled the world for 15 years, then earned his MFA at the Hartford Art School. He was recently awarded the Cord Prize, the Light Work Grant, the Emerging Photography Award, and residencies at Headlands, La Napoule Foundation, the Terra Foundation, the Hemera Foundation, Salzburger Kunstverein, the Philadelphia Photo Art Center, the Tides Institute, the Hambidge Center, and the Virginia Center for the Creative Arts. Since I'm showing off my accents there, I probably should say, and the Virginia Center for the Creative Arts. His portfolios have been featured in publications including the British Journal of Photography, Der Greif, Contact Sheet, the Source Photographic Review, GUP magazine, PIC magazine, Raw View magazine, Romka magazine, Fraction magazine, L'Oeil de la Photographie, Future Shoot, Latent Image, Darwin magazine, Phases magazine, Vice magazine, and CNN. That's who Allie Marshall will be speaking with tonight. Allie Marshall is a poet, performer, writer, editor, filmmaker, and creative community builder. She's interested in moving writing beyond the page, seeking the golden in the mundane, finding the intersection of art and social justice, and reconnecting with mythology, both ancient and modern. Allie, we should talk. She's a contributor to the collaborative multimedia responsive exhibitions Object as Poet and Craft with a Stranger at the Center for Craft, Creativity, and Design, 2017. She was a 2016 Thomas Wolfe Fiction Prize winner, a 2016 Rash Award finalist, a 2016 Shrewd Writer Award winner, and a 2016 Thomas Wolfe Literary Award semifinalist. I'm going to turn this over to Allie, and I remind you, if you have questions, you will be muted, so put them into the chat, and we'll be calling on you as they finish their conversation.
Well, hi, everyone. It is a pleasure to be here, and I see Sebastian, but not my giant head on the screen.
Yeah, it's weird.
It is weird. But you can hear me, right? And basically, Sebastian and I are wearing the same shirt. So I put on a scarf so you could tell us apart. But if Sebastian shows up on the screen, it's fine. We're like the same person today. So that's cool. I'm just going to start talking and maybe Zoom will figure itself out. So today we're talking about Sebastian's ongoing photo exhibit, Ghost Man, which can be seen on his website, and we'll be looking at it as we talk. But I just wanted to share, because this thought crossed my mind today when I was posting on Facebook about this meeting, that the images in it really struck me in the themes of loneliness and isolation, and how even though those meant different things at the time Sebastian was taking the photos, they really connect to the way I'm feeling right now and the way I imagine a lot of us are feeling in quarantine and, faced with many different types of losses and loss of community. So with that idea in mind, as I went back through the exhibition Ghost Man, I'm going to see if I can just do share screen and pull up one of the images that really spoke to me in this particular way. Can people see this image?
Allie, if you want, I can do a PDF share too, or a website.
Okay. Yeah, maybe Sebastian can. So I don't have the proper titles. I just made notes for myself.
Yeah, let me how do I do this? Go back here. Okay, share screen. I think you have to unshare yours
Yep.
if first.
Stop sharing. I stopped.
Okay, so here we go. All right, everyone see that?
Yes.
Okay, so Allie was talking about this image.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so this one just really speaks to me of that sense of isolation, loneliness, separation from the world. And it's also, for me, a great lead in to my initial response to this exhibition, which was how the imagery is both compelling and repellent, and how human forms are juxtaposed against the shells of abandoned architecture and various inanimate objects, which kind of, to my view, sort of lend story from one to the other. So we begin to see these kind of fragmented human lives taking on the forms of architecture that's kind of being reclaimed by the earth, or, you know, humans as inanimate objects, in the sense of abandonment, how they're abandoned by society or family, or have abandoned themselves. So those were just kind of my initial reactions, Sebastian, and I'm wondering how those sit with you, and, you know, how you would speak to any of that.
Yeah, well, thank you. First of all, thank you to Revolve and everyone for organizing this. It's a great way to opportunity to connect with people. And I'm glad that you, paradoxically, uh, and I agree that my work is, in some ways, all of my work is about this sense of loneliness and disconnection, but this project in more than any of the others, in fact. And as, of course, I was not, you know, it's more about trauma and generational trauma, connected with the Holocaust and with history of Poland. These photos were made in the town where my grandfather was born in Poland, and he later died in Auschwitz. So there's a lot of heavy history there, but which is clear if you read the statement that's on the website. But I think that you don't even have to. I think just looking at the images, you can, as with any photography, you can really project or be moved in you know, whatever way it strikes you. And so the connection to the present moment is very true, and not just the sense of isolation and disconnection, but also a lot of the political things that are going on, the way the current crisis is, you know, disproportionately affecting homeless people and poor people and people who already have a lot of trauma that they're wrestling with. And so those populations are very much represented in this project as well, although in a very different context. So yeah, I think it's a good tie-in.
Could you, Sebastian, could you maybe share a few more images? And
Oh yes,
I'm
thank you.
especially interested.
Thank
Sorry.
you. Thank you for the reminder, because I attend a lot of these Zoom calls and I always get really bored when they just leave it on one picture. So I'm going to try to keep it moving. So I'll actually go back to the beginning. This is obviously just a very small selection of images from the project, which is an ongoing project. In fact, I was planning to be back there this summer, and of course now that probably won't happen, but I'll certainly go as soon as I can. This is an old factory. This town was a kind of like a European Detroit, or, you know, one of these cities that had an incredible industrial renaissance at the turn of the century, which is when my grandfather moved there to work in one of these factories. And now, of course, they're all pretty much boarded up, and it's starting to be renovated, you know, rejuvenated and gentrified in ways that are problematic as always. But so I'll go through these kind of quickly. And Allie, please jump in if you have any particular response or questions about a specific image.
Sure.
I'm going to go through them all initially because I don't know whether everyone's seen them before.
Maybe as you're going through them, I'll bring up that you and I, in leading up to this talk, had kind of batted around the idea of hauntology, which is a really interesting term. And so my takeaway of the meaning of the word, it's a fairly recently conceived word, and it describes a disunion or separation of time or being in which presence is replaced by a different non-origin. So, or the definition is it haunts by replacing. And I am guessing that the hauntology in your work is that idea of the generational trauma and sort of the ghost of the Holocaust in these present day lives. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, hauntology is a word that I use with some hesitation because it doesn't, it's like, as you said, it's a newly minted word. It's kind of a neologism that doesn't really have a clear definition. And a lot of people use it without knowing what it means. And I'll include myself in that, and I think that actually there's something kind of appropriate about not exactly knowing what it means, because a lot of this work, dealing with trauma, trauma for me is literally an interruption in the brain's ability to make meaning out of life experiences. It's like a rupture in the fabric of reality. And so when we try to come to terms with trauma, whether it's personal or generational or historical, cultural, it's very hard to represent, Of course, with photography, I read a lot of theory about all kinds of things, and there's whole theories of photography that connect it directly with trauma as a medium. And without, we could spend an hour on that, so I won't bore everyone. But there's a connection with the actual medium of photography and the way that the camera is arresting moments and decontextualizing and kind of stealing moments in a very violent way from a continuous stream of experience. And so, in a sense, all photographs are traumatic. And then when, in this case, of course, I'm photographing people in this town that has a very traumatic history. And, they, of course, many of them are young. Most of these people, if not all, were probably not alive during the Holocaust. So that trauma has been passed down in many, many, many ways. And so both to these people as individuals, but I'm also using them in a sense, as in all of my work, the portraits are sort of simultaneously about the individual person, but probably more so, I'm kind of using them as like allegories or as characters to represent these larger ideas that I want to talk about. And so, yeah, that was sort of a long-winded response, but ask me another question.
Well, I think that in discussing trauma and how just the act of taking a photograph is sort of involved in that, can you just maybe briefly touch on the ethics of photographing people in disadvantaged situations?
Yes, that's something that, so Allie and I are friends and we actually live 2 blocks from each other. So it's funny that we're doing this on Zoom. And we took a walk the other day and talked about this. And, I think that it's a complicated thing, photographing people, whether they're homeless or victims of violence, like this guy, for example, down and out, whatever it is. Obviously, there's a huge, long tradition of photographers photographing people who are, seen in this way. And it's, I think that, I'm trying to think how you posed the question to me the other day, Allie, because I don't feel that it's wrong to do it, but I do think it's important to be aware of how, what kind of narrative is being constructed.
Right.
And also being upfront about it. Like I'm not presenting these as, like I said, I'm not trying to make some sort of documentary editorial photography statement about these people. That would be a very different kind of project, and it would be shown in a very different way. And so for me, I'm really drawn to people who evoke some of the themes that I'm trying to explore in the work. And then beyond that, you know, obviously I'm choosing moments and poses and gestures, and in some cases staging things that that also build that narrative.
Mm. In the course of that conversation, we had touched a little bit on how involved various photographers get with their subjects and with their work.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking about that, and also in kind of approaching some of these difficult scenes. Does your camera create a sort of like a shield or a barrier between you and this pain that you're encountering?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think it does both. It does two opposite things. One of my favorite quotes from Deanne Arbus is that, you know, I won't get it right, but the gist of the quote is that for her, the camera was kind of a portal into another world, and a kind of like a passport. You know, it like allowed her to go into an environment and photograph people that she normally would never have engaged with. And of course, she also was photographing a lot of, I mean, this is in a whole different era, but, you know, so-called freaks, people on the sort of margins of society, people that, you know, were not part of her upper middle class reality. Now, so on the one hand, I think it gives a kind of an access. On the other hand, it does protect. It does. It is a piece of glass in between me and the subject, you know, and it's a way. It's both a kind of a pretext for connection, but also a kind of like you said, a shield that allows me to have a very specific kind of encounter that's very different from the kind of encounter I would have if I didn't have the camera.
Mm. There's a picture, I'm not sure if it's come up on the screen yet, but it's like a few plants and they're behind a little fence. It's one of the handful of color photos in this collection.
Let's see. Oh, the grass.
Yeah.
You know what? I'm realizing this PDF is a slightly different version from the one on the website. So I'm going to switch to the website.
Okay.
And that's, here we go. Okay. Can everyone still see this, the images?
It's still the PDF and it's kind of blurry right now.
Oh, okay. Hold on. Let me just close the PDF. Okay. Sorry. I'm going to share screen again. Okay.
Whoa.
Is it working?
We're seeing your screen.
Yeah.
How about now?
Yep. That's
okay.
Perfect.
So you're looking for the green grass.
Mm-hmm. The reason that I'm mentioning this one is both because I was curious about the decision the decision to make certain photos in color,
yeah,
instead of just having the full collection be black and white. And then also these little nature scenes. This one really spoke to me because it's beautiful, but it's also like captured, it's trapped, and it's this tiny little piece of wilderness inside a fence. And I don't get it, but it still really feels like it's telling the same story of these other kind of trapped beings within this collection.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I like that. I mean, to me, it's kind of a funny picture, and in fact, I almost didn't include it in the series, along with many, many others. Of course, it's very, as for all photographers know, it's always very hard to edit down when you shoot a lot. But I wasn't so much thinking about trapped, but more, I guess I was, maybe confinement, the kind of, another friend who helps me edit this, I think it was Mike who's on this call, said it seemed, maybe it was someone else, but it evoked a kind of a sense of imprisonment, like at the concentration camp,
Mm.
barbed wire fences in Auschwitz. And yeah, so, but to me, what's funny about it is that it's this, as you said, natural plant encaged in a natural colored mesh, but then it's also in a park, so it's like, why are they trying to keep this thing from getting out? It's just in a park. So there's a lot of funny layers to it. But I also, so to come to your question about the color in black and white, that's something, I have other series that are all black and white, and I have some series that are all color. In this one, it felt right to mix them, but of course I was very careful about the positioning of the color images within the series. I think they kind of serve as a bit of a punctuation or breaks. Sometimes, there'll be, well, in this case, there's a color, black and white color, but sometimes there'll be several black and white and then suddenly a color image. And even this image, for example, here, it's color, but it's very subdued palette. It's very, very sort of, it's not a very colorful image except for that red that pops out. So I try to be very intentional about how to make those kind of languages talk to each other.
Yeah. How since you're not able to go to Poland right now, and you're not able to exhibit this in a tangible way, in a public way, how do you feel about online exhibitions? Maybe that's too general. How do you feel about your own online exhibition? How do you feel about the experience of sharing it with the viewer in that way, and the experience of the viewer seeing it online versus in person?
Well, first of all, I would not call it an exhibition. I mean, to me, an exhibition is in person. So
Okay.
it's fine to call it that. I mean, I don't personally. I see it as as a web gallery, and it's obviously it's accessible to a lot of people. It's a good window into the work. So this town, interestingly, has a very notable and international photography festival, which was slated to happen this summer, and I was going to be there for it, as I was last year. And of course now it's moving online, and they're not sure if they'll do in-person events, but there's a good possibility I'll actually be showing this work there in the festival next year in 2021. To me, not that the physical exhibition is necessarily the most important thing. I think it depends on the work. In some cases, for me, I think some work lives better in a book, or lives better on a website, and others better on a wall, and some in all contexts. So this is sort of just the first stage for me, I think, as a way of getting it out there, being able to get feedback and engage with different types of online platforms, and then see where that leads.
So since you're not able to return to Poland this year and continue this project, what are you doing during quarantine and in general?
You're not supposed to ask me that. That's a secret.
Okay, well, do you want me to ask a different question, or do you want to make up a lie?
No, I'm kidding. No, it's a very good question. I like a lot of artists, I think I've been struggling about, do I just continue to hole up? I mean, I've tried to get work done in the studio, and there's only so much you can do, and you start to go crazy just staring at the computer all day. And so I'm actually strongly debating taking a photographic road trip and working on an entirely different project that's been kind of on the back burner for about 10 years out in the desert. So we'll see if that happens. I think it will. It might be another week or two before I leave, but as I can't go to Europe, which is normally where I would be right now, I got to do something creative. So, you know, where a better place for social distancing than the middle of nowhere in the desert?
It's really the ultimate social distancing.
Absolutely, right?
Yeah. Well, I know we've been talking close to half an hour.
Do
Bernard,
you have
should
any
we?
questions?
Yeah, I'm looking at your time, and I just want to let you know, since we got started late on the second half, if you two have things you want to talk about, do come back to them. But maybe we'll just bring up a couple of the questions
Yeah.
now.
Yeah,
That's
that sounds
comfortable
good.
for you. So I want to mention first of all Margaret Curtis, and Colby will unmute you, Margaret. Had brought up, and I'd like her to put it this way, because she does something that I really appreciate in her question or in her comment, is for me, the first thing I very often see in an artist's work is something the artist often doesn't want to hear. Your work reminds me of. So if Margaret would like to say, you know, a little bit about why she thought about a couple of artists. And let me just say, Sebastian, when you all are talking with your questioners, it might be good to share screen.
Oh,
And then
sorry.
everybody go to the speaker, you know, go to the speaker view so it'll be more like we see each other.
Gotcha. So I should unshare now, right?
Yes, I think that
Okay.
would be good. So Margaret, are you there?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. Yeah, I just, the images of the man with the missing jaw, the wounded face, if you don't know Lynn Folk's work, he's an extraordinary painter, definitely worth checking out. He's well known within painting circles, but not outside of that really, I guess.
Uh-huh.
And then George Tooker is somebody who I think you would relate to, the sense of isolation and the sort of depth of space in his work. You know, and how that contributes to the sense of isolation. They're just things I think you would enjoy if you don't
Yeah.
know about them already.
Thank you. I don't know those names, so I'll check them out. That's great.
And we do have someone, Dave Hamilton. And Dave, I don't know if you're yourself a photographer and artist, but Dave has made a suggestion about a photography project. If you're there, Dave.
I am here, yes. I was suggesting, we've been seeing a lot of playgrounds that look really weird and freaky with caution tape around them, and just a photo project I've talked about doing, but I don't pick up a camera, so I haven't done it. And I just don't think the iPhone capturing of that is anything worth my time. So I was just suggesting that as a photo project. If you're looking for anything, Sebastian, that calls to you that's weird and freaky in the playground with caution tape category.
Yeah, that's hard not to take pictures of that. Yes, it's true. Thank you.
I'm going to say that's probably a very good answer. I wanted to bring up, because it's a little bit what Dave talked about. You were talking about the plant in a cage, and because there's no sense of scale in that photo, I look at it and I think that the plant is like 4 inches tall. But for all I know, it could be almost, you know, as tall as a hedge. So it struck me that it was a little bit of a figure of the kind of thing you're talking about in photography. The plant is inside the cage and divided from you. But in fact, almost always, the reason that plants like that are in cages is to protect them from animals devouring them. Although I must say that looks like it's too small to, it's certainly too small to stop a deer. I don't know if it's too small to stop a rabbit. What was the size of that plant? Do you remember?
Maybe 2 feet tall.
Oh, okay. So it's bigger than I took it for.
Well, I don't. Yeah, maybe 1 or 2. It wasn't huge. I honestly don't quite remember. And you're right. The scale is hard to tell, but yeah.
But that's intentional because you're an artist. So speaking of which, like, this is a full disclosure thing. Sebastian and I have sat with his photographs quite a number of times. And I think for this project, you've alluded a little bit to your family history, and you have used these terms, ontology and trauma. But
Yeah.
would you like to say a little bit more about what happened within your family, how your family's experience, in a way, constitutes the experience of this town for a century or so, and of course of European Jews in Poland during the Holocaust?
Oof. Okay.
You want to talk about that?
Do we have another half hour?
Yeah.
No, that's great. I'm glad you asked that, because I realize a lot of people may not know the whole backstory of the project. So, oh, it's there's so much to tell, but first of all, I was not raised Jewish, so there's a very interesting, oh gosh, there's a lot of interesting things at play that people tend to make a lot of assumptions, I think, about the work and see it as like a Jewish project, or they assume that it should be a Jewish project because it's connected to the Holocaust, for example. So to me, again, it's really more about trauma more broadly. Although, of course, the setting is this specific town. All the pictures are taken in that town, where my grandfather was born. He later moved to France, where my adoptive father, so he's also not my biological father. So that also complicates things in the sense that, when we talk about trauma passed through generations, a lot of times people think of it as passing through genetically, which is certainly happens. But there's this whole field of trauma studies now, a lot of which looks at the ways in which trauma is passed, not only genetically, but through so many other avenues, cultural, through stories, through gestures, in some ways, more through things that aren't said than things that are said within families. And so this kind of, a lot of people who grew up with, whose parents were Holocaust survivors, which my stepdad was, absorb a lot of this trauma in a way that is not necessarily obvious. And I think in a way that a lot of people aren't even aware of themselves. And so again, the short of the story is that my grandfather lived in France and then was deported to Poland along with my grandmother. My adoptive father was lucky enough to escape and went into hiding for 2 years from the Nazis, and was able to come to the US after the war at a very young age. So he literally was running from the Nazis from 14 to 16, which is just an incredible, when you think about, literally being a child on the run, running for your life for 2 years. It's that, he never went to the camps, which was, but he was still obviously traumatized by losing his entire family. He never saw his parents again. He never saw anyone again. In fact, he never returned to France for, another 40 years or so. Anyway, that was not talked about in my early childhood, but as he became older, he had become a French professor, and he started, as he, got into his 50s and 60s, started to want to confront his own family history and want to learn about it, and he actually became an expert in Holocaust literature, started teaching courses in it. And he took our family back to Poland to go to Auschwitz and many other camps. So I have many childhood memories of playing on the train tracks at Auschwitz and exploring the bunkers at Dachau and all, these very morbid environments. But, I was a kid. So for me, they were kind of this beautiful, pastoral, Auschwitz is actually a very stunningly beautiful place. I actually have another project in progress about Auschwitz specifically. And I was there a lot. I was there for 10 days last year. So, I guess I'm going on a bit of a tangent, but did I answer your question, or are you looking for something more
Oh,
specific?
yeah, I was actually just hoping you could locate it for people, but let me ask
Yes.
you, um, or rather ask Allie if there's anything she's been thinking about in regard to the personal history in this, because after all, if this was not the history of your family, you wouldn't be taking those photographs. There is someone who says somewhere that the important things in photographs are all things we don't see. They're all things that the images refer to and have behind them. Every photographer has to make a decision about how much text to use, how much story to tell, et cetera. And I personally feel, after looking at them for some time, you can have a show of your work and not explain it. But it's very, very different if you do. Allie, I just wanted to know if there's anything, having observed the work, you wanted to mention in regard to the relationship to this town and to Sebastian's family history.
I mean, I feel like what he just shared is probably what can best be said about it. I don't feel like I could really add
Okay.
anything beyond, Sebastian's very intimate and personal knowledge of the work and the story behind it.
I'm noticing there's some good questions coming in on the chat.
Mm. Yeah, so I think since we really should end in a minute, I'm going to send Margaret a note about her question, and we won't try to address it, but it's essentially about the crypto Jews of the Southwest United States and whether you would be interested in researching them if that's where you're going. But we can talk about that offline. I do want to get to a question of Colby's, because I also wanted to ask some questions about form and the decisions that you make. I think when people talk about art and people who haven't had much experience, I mean, there are still reviewers out there saying that, it's a mistake to classify photography as art because of the nature of the mechanism and, what they think of as the nature of the project that the artist is involved in. But I'm going to leave all that aside so that I can say, when they look at a photograph, what they believe they're seeing is the subject matter. And they come away talking about facial expression or something like that. But we all know that what they're talking about is the formal decisions. So Colby, can talk to you as a fellow photographer just for a minute about how you make certain decisions when you both photograph and print.
Yes. So, oh, sorry.
Yeah, so yeah, Sebastian, my question was really about the fact that you'd mentioned, and Allie actually brought up the fact, which I think is really fascinating within the body of work, that you fluctuate between color and black and white.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm imagining, and I guess not to get too techno nerdy, but I imagine you're shooting digitally. Is that correct?
Yeah, and
So I'm just curious if you're shooting always in color, and then you make decisions about making the colors black and white. Or,
yeah.
I mean, obviously it can't be vice versa. So you'd shoot in color, and then you would convert the images to black and white once you start editing. Why is that true? Is that true?
In this series, it is. So I have other series that were shot on film, and so in those cases, of course, the nature of the film dictates that. But
so this series, you have there's a moment during the editing that you decide to go between
yes.
color and black and white. What drives that decision?
A lot of things, there's certain images that I actually kept going back and forth with. There's certain ones that are just, oh, this has to be color. And there's others that, oh, this has to be black and white. And there's some that I could go either way. And so it depends on the context, it depends on where it is in the sequence, depends on the relationship to the image right after it, things like that.
So just to get up, because I think that's really interesting. You're talking about, in a sense, that your decisions about color and black and white are not only embedded in the image itself, but also in the way that they're sequenced in the series.
Sure, of course. I can, let me share the screen for a moment. Oops, okay. Are people seeing the screen now?
Yes.
Okay. So, there's like this image, for example, I had this in color for a long time, and then I switched to black and white. This one to me is clearly a color image. Without the color, I mean, it's so much about the color. the smeared red on the wall looks like blood to me, and you know, these are clearly black and white for me, no question. This one's a very clearly color image for me. You know, this one I've tried both ways. This one as well. You know, so I think you know, it's just like you know, anything in the sequencing has a lot of elements. You know, I think of it in musical terms. You know, rhythm, pacing, tonality. You know, timbre, like all of those kind. You know, I have a history in music before I did photography, so I think in a lot of those terms when I'm sequencing. And you know, there's something about the way that color. You know, if you have a string of black and white images and suddenly you have a color one, it just kind of boom, it kind of pops out at you in a certain way. And sometimes that's good, and sometimes it's not good. You know, sometimes you don't want that. So. You know, I think, you know, that's something that is fluid for me. And I'm not saying that, you know, the thing about digital, obviously you have a lot of options, and you can change your mind later. You know, I mean, I can show them this way now, and then I could change it tomorrow and make them color, you know, and so, of course, purists would scream at that, but, and I am a purist in a lot of ways. I mean, here's another example where I had this image in black and white, and of course it's very beautiful in black and white, but there's something about the redness of his butt, you know, the kind of rash color that I wanted that to me makes it a little bit more gruesome. And I, you know, when it's in black and white, it just is kind of this like beautiful figure study. And so the color gives it.
So in a sense, are you using color, black and white, as a way to kind of advance your narrative ideas?
Yeah, among other things. I mean, this one clearly needs to be in color. You know, the red light of the button. You know, and this one. You know, this one could go either way. You know. So anyway, I mean, but I think it's. I don't know. I don't. It's important, but I also don't really want to dwell on it too much because I don't know. You know, I guess technical things in general, I try not to talk about too much.
So you're, in a sense, you're just you're discussing the fact that it's quite intuitive to you.
Yes, sure. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, so we are keeping people just a little bit late, but as I say, we got started late on the second half. Sebastian, if you would unshare before I toss this back to
Sure.
Colby, I'd
Sure.
just like to ask both of you, Sebastian and Allie, if there's anything that you could mention now that people can support you as artists, writers, etc. So maybe enter websites, etc., into the chat so people can take away. Of course, Sebastian, is there anything coming up we should know about that we can patronize?
Oh gosh, I mean, personally, sure, you send me money. No,
Buy your work?
yeah, of course. I mean, you know, anyone that's interested in either purchasing work or, you know, including work in exhibitions, I have a contact form on my website. Just go there. It's sebastiancolette.net. It's also linked on the event page. But no, I'm not. You know, it's interesting. You know, there's a lot of relationships, strangely, between this segment and the earlier segment. But at the same time, you know, because obviously artists are very much affected by the pandemic, and you know, a lot of our income has just evaporated. But at the same time, I don't view my work as a business in the same way. It's something that I fund from other income sources, and so I'm lucky to be able to do that. But anyway, I do want to. I'm just noticing that there was a Sharon Rupp asked a question. Can I answer that one?
Sure, sure.
I don't. Do you want to unmute her?
Sure.
So Sharon asked, please explain how much you get involved with the people you photograph. and that's a great question that also came up with Allie in conversation. Again, coming back to this idea of photographing people who are suffering or down and out or whatever. And there's so many photographers who photograph similar populations, but there are so many radically different approaches to it. And some people get very involved, and some people stay very, very distant. And I kind of I feel like I covered the span of it. You know, it's again very intuitive. A lot of it has to do with my own sense of safety, of course. You know, I have gotten into situations where I felt perhaps threatened, but I'm also really good at getting out of those situations. And so I'm not afraid to get close to that. But at the same time, I'm not trying to embed myself. You know, another photographer comes to mind who goes to quite great extremes with embedding herself in the lives of her subjects to the point of actually, you know, sleeping with them and doing drugs with them and literally living their lives with them. And that's something that, you know, I don't usually go that far. I'm not saying I've never slept with a subject, but it's not necessarily the goal. And I don't think that I don't think that necessarily makes a better picture. And that's something I think people assume, that, oh, you got to get like really, really close to people and get super involved in their lives to get good pictures. I think in some ways the opposite can be true, that when you get to know people too much, it can be harder to see them clearly. And so some of my favorite pictures were made of people that I barely spoke to, or spoke to for 30 seconds, you know, or just took a quick photo. And then others, I mean, I could go back and tell stories about any of them, but, you know, others were people I spent hours with. So I do think it's a fascinating topic, and I think there's no one right way to do it. I think every photographer has their own kind of approach to that, and that yeah, I could talk about that all day. So
and we do not have time for that. So before I toss it back to Colby, thank you, Sebastian. Let me ask Allie if there's anything she'd like to bring up. She has put 2 websites up in the chat. Allie?
Yes, I put 2 websites up in the chat. One is a project that I'm working on right now called Essential Work, and it's interviews with artists and how they are pivoting their careers or just rethinking their relationship to art during quarantine.
And the other one is your personal website for
personal website. Correct.
Is your writing up there? Is that a place one could look to track down your work?
Yeah, a lot of my work these days is in video form. I do spoken word performance, so it's in video and sound. But yes, you can find that through my website.
Thanks a lot. Sebastian and Allie, thank you very much for your face-to-face interview time. I'm going to send this back to Colby Caldwell.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks to both you folks. I really appreciate it. I'm just going to throw up on the screen the homeschool website so you can take a look and help if you want to see what else we have coming up.